If you click this episode, it is because you are interested in Arizona Proposition 139, which would legalize abortion for all 9 months of pregnancy. I know there's a lot of information coming at you about this bill, and so this episode seeks to separate myth from fact, truth from false, in order to help you understand what exactly is being voted on. Thank you for clicking on this episode of Redeeming Truth. Welcome to the Redeeming Truth podcast. My name's John. I'm one of the pastors at Redeemer Bible Church in Gilbert, Arizona. And with me today is Josiah Friedman, a friend of mine who God has really used in a lot of ways to be a blessing in the pro-life movement. And I've asked him to come here today specifically to talk about Proposition 139. It is the amendment on the 2024 Arizona state election that would legalize abortion for up to 9 months. And so, Josiah, thank you for being here on our show. And my question to get us started is, what is it that makes you that puts you in this fight? What is it that has inspired you to be a part of this?
The reason I'm a part of this, and it's an honor to be here, Pastor John, has changed. I met Jesus when I was about 15. My dad was a physician, passionate about the science of the life in the womb, that it was a human being that was growing, that was real and tangible, and the weakest in society that was being taken advantage of. So I started really passionate about justice on this issue, and that was why I was involved in it at the beginning. And 3 years in, my mom sat me down on the couch and said, "Hey, there's something that I've got to tell you. It's weighing on me with this work that you're doing. I just need you to know." And she told me her abortion story about when she was 19. She grew up in a Catholic family in a small town where everybody knew her family. And she knew when she found out she was pregnant, only one thing, and that was her dad could never find out. If he found out, her relationship that she thought really had promise would be over, and her family's reputation would be tarnished forever. And so she went to a clinic. They said, "You can go here and get an abortion discreetly. No one will have to know." And she did. She hoped it was over then, Pastor John. 2 days later, she began bleeding everywhere, had to be rushed back to the hospital. And she went through great lengths once her parents learned about that to hide why she was there. And 30 years later, there was me, her oldest son, sitting on the couch. And she just couldn't take it anymore. I was pricking a wound I did not know existed. And God used that moment to help me understand that this issue was both about justice, but it was also about a real person who felt like this was their only choice, backed into a complete corner. And I began to get really curious. Why do people feel like abortion's their only choice? And so my background is in interviewing really hundreds of people, some strangers, some leaders, about why they felt abortion was their only choice, what caused them to feel that way, and how that could have been changed. And it's from that position, that kind of posture of listening and sitting with people that I speak to the world to help them understand that I think abortion is a failure of community fundamentally, and it's going to take all of us to repair it.
So abortion is seeking to expand its reach here into our community through Prop 139. And so if somebody's hearing about this for the first time, what would it be that you would like them to know about this proposition?
I think there's, Arizona is a state where a lot of people are pro-life, a lot of people are pro-choice. There's a lot of differentiating opinion here. And I think no matter where you come from or what you think on this issue, Prop 139 is far away from what the broad consensus is on this issue. Because of a few different reasons, which we can get into and talk about. But one of those reasons, Pastor John, is that the broad consensus is that people are only comfortable with abortion through about 15 weeks of pregnancy. About 90% of people are. This takes that through viability, and it has the same exceptions that allow for abortion beyond viability in addition. So it greenlights late-term abortion. It also gets rid of a lot of really common sense safeguards that we've had for a long time. For example, the general belief that if a minor gets pregnant in an unexpected situation, she shouldn't be able to get an abortion without her parents knowing it, that her parents deserve the opportunity to come around her and support and to help her walk through something like that. The laws that protect that parental consent would be gotten rid of completely by this initiative. There's one other provision, Pastor John, that I think is really important, which is that abortion no matter where you stand on it, one thing you have to acknowledge is that it is often used as a tool of sex abusers and human traffickers to basically greenlight the perpetuation of a great evil. Have someone get an abortion when they get pregnant and continue in this trade. Because Prop 139 would eliminate basically any legal requirements or legal burden on somebody who's pressuring someone to get an abortion, it would allow those sex abusers who are using abortion for profit and to keep people in a trade in which they deeply wish to escape. It would allow them to continue perpetuating that risk-free without any legal repercussions. And I think all of us realize that just wouldn't be good for our state at all.
So over 90% of Arizonans say they do not want abortion at all past 15 weeks. They can argue over before that. Want parents to be able to have input into a minor's decision to get an abortion, and want people punished who, like sex traffickers and things of that nature, who would be able to get around loopholes that would allow people under their watch to have an abortion and continue in the trade that they're a part of. And so how do you respond to somebody that says it doesn't say anything about parental consent at all?
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, what it creates is a fundamental right to abortion. And what it prevents is anything getting in the way of that right, including any person, in other words, including a parent.
Correct.
So parents would not have any legal say in that regard, and the law that Arizona has on the books would be nullified instantly if this were to pass.
Yeah, and the law itself uses the term individual versus adult. So it doesn't make a distinction between adult and minor, which then therefore allows anybody, even a minor, to get an abortion without any consent from a parent at all. And that's why people are saying, no, it's not a myth, it's true.
Yes.
Like, this does open the way for parents to not have any input on this.
Right.
What about there's also this aspect for doctors, that it removes a doctor from the care of a patient, or let me rephrase that. It removes the doctor from this, from an abortion, through the language of healthcare professional. Like, why does that matter?
It matters because this is a procedure that can have complications sometimes, and sometimes is surrounding other health issues. So it's very important that people getting an abortion have the best health care available to them when that happens. And that means they need typically and ideally a physician involved, or at least a qualified an expert in that kind of care. Now, the problem is this defines healthcare professional and uses terminology that's so broad, it could apply to a massage therapist who would now have the right to prescribe an abortion. Anybody who technically falls into the broad legal category of healthcare professional could be there. And the issue with that, Pastor John, is we want people to be safe. But also the issue for that is that since Roe is overturned, there's this whole new industry that Arizona has made illegal of abortion pill sales organizations that are mailing pills to people's homes. And Arizona has long required that somebody has to meet with a healthcare professional in order to get the abortion pill. There are reasons why this is really important, including that if you don't meet with a healthcare professional and you don't get any kind of ultrasound, you could have an ectopic pregnancy. The symptoms of an ectopic pregnancy, by the way, and of taking the abortion pill are the same. And if you have an ectopic pregnancy and you don't get it treated, you will die. So having a healthcare professional involved in that is extremely important. Lives will be lost because we're unable to care for people in a proper way. So if the authors of this proposition had really had in their mind a deep concern for the women that they say they're trying to help, they would have at least included provisions making sure that a qualified healthcare professional were required to be a part of these conversations. This gets rid of that requirement. So I think it's really dangerous.
That's super helpful, I think, because I think we have a very simplistic view of the way that laws are passed. We just hear it say, we hear things like protect women's rights, or protect allowing people to make their own choices medically. But this bill goes way beyond that, way beyond any of those things. Now, you said something I want to come back to about how the bill does not protect, or the bill lets sex abusers off. scot-free in many cases. Somebody would say that that's so not true. Like, we hate sex abuse, we hate human trafficking, we would never, but what about the bill allows that to happen?
So I encourage you to read it. I think that it doesn't take a brilliant wordsmith to go in and read it with an open mind and see what's going on. But because it creates a fundamental right to abortion and actually protects anybody, it inhibits anyone who would get in the way of that.
It does.
It prevents any legal resource to go after people who are actually getting someone to an abortion clinic. So we may have ways to hold sex abusers accountable and catch them, but one of the most common sense ways is for someone who's taking someone to an abortion clinic to be required to screen for why they're there, and if they're there for the wrong reasons, then to be able to hold them legally accountable. This creates a really horrible gray line where that sex abuser would essentially have a free pass. Now, to be honest, Pastor John, they've had a free pass this whole time. Abortion, it's well documented. You can look into it. It's well documented as a tool of sex abusers and human traffickers to keep people stuck in this position and to deal with things discreetly. If someone becomes a mother, right, that's a great inhibitor to that whole trade and process. It's very important that we do everything we can to hold those people accountable, and this gets in the way of that.
Absolutely does. The amendment prohibits, quote, penalizing anyone for aiding or assisting someone getting an abortion. So they could just take their victim to go get an abortion to cover up their crime, and they're not going to be penalized for covering up, and they're not going to, if it's a minor, won't have to tell their parents. Parents won't be notified at all about the whole thing.
The thing, Pastor John, is that abortion, like I said, is fundamentally a failure of community. And there are millions of people, including in Arizona, who have walked through an abortion and they've been isolated and completely alone. And the truth is that human beings never thrive in those environments. This is a bill that completely incentivizes that kind of situation. It creates a society that will become dependent, like we are now, but even more so, on this issue being swept under the rug, dealt with in secret, without the proper safety precautions. And there's just no reason it should be that way. I've had many conversations with people, and in my work, and what we're focused on is creating resources for people so that motherhood can be a path of success. Our vision is that all around the world in the United States, we could create a world where choosing motherhood really makes sense, where the societies and structures that we have, whether it's businesses or healthcare, all support the decision we all want, which is the growth of families and people thriving in community. There's many paths toward that. We can create incentives for paid maternity leave for businesses to begin providing that. We could begin providing better resources so that healthcare professionals can walk through a journey of unexpected pregnancy with one of their patients in a more meaningful way. And we can invest much more heavily in resources that help people to thrive on their journey, no matter how their journey begins. This provision does none of those things. It's kind of a defeatist proposition in my mind. It says the best world we can imagine, the best future we can imagine for Arizona is a world where people very frequently have to choose between a life they want, a bright future for themselves, or a bright future for their child. And I don't think anybody in Arizona should be forced to make that choice. And so I think no matter where you're at in the politics of this issue, this proposition isn't really as complicated, and I encourage you to read it and look for any ways that you could find a redemptive purpose in it that would make life better for women who are trying to find a path forward for themselves. No one goes into their situation thinking, you know what I want? I want an abortion. That's not the story of anyone, Pastor John. The reality is it's people who feel trapped in situations where they can't escape. In most of those situations, they feel stuck in secret. And we need to do everything that we can to make sure that our institutions and our churches and our communities function in a way that helps everyone realize there's a path to success if they choose motherhood. And regardless of what they choose, to be honest, they should be safe. I don't see how this proposition moves either of those things forward.
So you're saying anti-motherhood is the soil where the seed of abortion can grow.
Yeah.
So One last, going back to what you said about reading the bill, we're talking about 6 paragraphs. So we're not talking about anything massive at all. Yeah. It takes 3 minutes to read the bill in its entirety. Yeah. And then the website itgoestofar.com allows people to see the bill and then see like, okay, as you're reading the bill, this is what this opens the door to, and this is what this opens the door to. And is there anything else that we need to touch on when it comes to this bill? I know it opens the door to taxpayer funding, so that now we're actually using our tax money in order to fund this, because it creates a fundamental right to abortion, which means that any restriction on a government healthcare insurance plan would be seen as interfering with abortion. And so government healthcare coverage for maternal costs would include these kinds of things. And so we would be funding abortions as Arizona taxpayers if this bill were to pass.
Yeah. I think the only thing to add is the way our proposition system works in Arizona. If you have any doubts, I mean, this puts something in our Constitution, Pastor John, that would be almost impossible to change. And because of that, it's critically important that people consider. Really, I think the question you should be asking with any proposition is, do I have any doubts that this is the best path forward for our state and the people in it? And for people in church, do I have any doubts that this is the best way to love my neighbor who's walking through an unexpected pregnancy? Or can I think of better ways to love them that we should advocate for instead? And if the answer is that you have doubts, or you can think of better ways, don't vote for it. It just doesn't make sense.
So go back to that quickly. The Arizona propositions, different from where I'm from in California. You said it's virtually impossible to change a proposition here in Arizona. Can you explain that?
It just goes in, it becomes it's in our Constitution, right? So you could go through this process, I guess, through another proposition system, which costs millions and millions and millions of dollars. But think about this. When Roe v. Wade was handed down in 1973, it did get overturned 50 years later. It got overturned with an investment of literally, it took billions and billions of dollars to overturn that decision. Whatever you think of it, I would think of it this way. If we put something in our Constitution, it's very hard to change. You could change it with millions and millions of dollars, or you could do something else with that money. Instead of creating that problem and focusing in that regard, we could actually spend the money on supporting women with paid maternity leave in our state so that no one has to choose between their livelihood and becoming a mother and their child. We can invest it in better training for healthcare professionals to know how to walk alongside their staff and employees. We can invest it in pregnancy resource centers and make sure that they can actually provide the support that's absolutely necessary. There's a lot we can do with that. There's a lot that would be wasted on a political process to undo something so hard to undo that wasn't ideal in the first place.
Gosh, well, I think you brought a ton of clarity to this issue for us, Josiah, and I'm very grateful for that. I think that once people hear the truth, that the decision for the Christian becomes obvious. The decision, like even the way you're arguing now, the decision for an entire society becomes obvious. The things that we're talking about from this bill are way beyond God's law, way beyond God's word, way beyond the polls here in Arizona. It's way beyond all of that. Yeah. And so what you've laid out, very simple, very clear, very helpful way to understand these things. And so thank you for that.
Well, thanks. As somebody in Arizona, this is something that I care for as an individual that lives here. And I also just think, Pastor John, there's a way forward on this issue for our country. As deeply divided as it is, there's a way forward where we make motherhood a path of success and where we focus on restoring the relationship between mother and child. Abortion is fundamentally, think of how it's sold, right? It's sold as a zero-sum game. You have a choice. You can choose between your future or your child's, just not both.
Yeah.
That's not really a choice worth protecting. That's a defeatist proposition. And what we should be able to do in our country, which is a very wealthy country in the world, is we should be able to create an environment where we prioritize our families and our children, and where we make it so that choosing motherhood is a no-brainer, where it makes sense and people can thrive. I think that is the kingdom vision on this issue. And I think when we lose that, we begin thinking about how could we intervene in ways that really don't make sense. I think this is one attempt to do that. And even for a handful of the Christians that may say that this is something that they're going to vote for, I think that I would really encourage them to question whether that's the way forward here, and if there's a better way for women.
Absolutely, 100%. Well, thank you for coming out and talking to us. Thank you for joining us today on the Redeeming Truth podcast. I think this is a critical issue. Even though this podcast goes out to people on the other side of the planet, it is still something that is so critically important for us to talk about. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Pastor John.
Very much. And thank you for joining us for the Redeeming Truth podcast. We'll see you next time. Hey, don't leave yet. If you're part of the 75% of people that watch our content but haven't subscribed, this is your time. Go down and find that little subscribe button and click it. That way you will know every time we come out with more content here from Redeemer Bible Church. Also, if you would like to give to this ministry, this is the only way that this ministry can happen. Make sure to click the link down below to the give button and you can give to the ministry here at Redeemer. And then finally, if you want to know more about what's going on, check out this podcast right here.